Welcome to yet another exciting episode of Did You Know? It's a series that actually all South Africans can benefit from. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel under Did You Know MGT Live, and voila, you will learn so much about our country, our history, its people, and its uniqueness. But I suppose all South Africans know about the Cape of Good Hope. I have still a lot of questions about it. And with me here today, an expert teacher, history and geography, and a very respected tourist guide, Mervin Wessels. Mervin, welcome here. But let's start from the very beginning. It is the southeastern point of the continent, not the southern point.
Well, before we get to the southeastern point of Africa, let us first go to the original reason for the debate.
Yes.
So Africa was pointless in the sense that Africa had no point, but was a continuous landform or landscape right across to Asia, which, according to the ancient map, had the Indian Ocean as a landlocked ocean. So the perception was there's no connection between Indian Ocean and Atlantic Ocean. And it primarily determined the entire thinking of the early travelers and the explorers. So we need to start off because the map that you see in front of you is the map of Ptolemy, which he drew in the year 150 AD. It is that old.
Yeah.
And this was the map that lasted and was the authentic map for 1,500 years. What we have today is a modern map that covers 550 years. Nothing compared to the original world map as we see it in front of us. And it's quite amazing that this map was applicable right up to the beginning of the 1500s. In 1507, we saw the start of the new map. Something between 1488 and 1507 happened to change the cartographic history of the world. And that was the journey of Bartholomew Diaz. It is the game changer that came about with regard to that.
Okay, so the Portuguese were actually leaders in the new cartography.
Not necessarily the Portuguese. Ptolemy was not a Portuguese. He was Egyptian. He grew up in Alexandria. He was an astronomer. He was a mathematician. And if you know the ancient Alexandria in Egypt, it became the fulcrum of all trades between Africa, the Arab world, and Europe. All people traveled through Alexandria. And it was a man like Ptolemy who recorded 8,000 locations in the then known world and started plot according to how they described the landscape, how they described the coastline. You must know the early great empires of Africa was centered around what later grew out to be the Ashanti Kingdom. Timbuktu was one of the big cities of there. So the Arab traders would cross the Sahara Desert on Alexandria and then trade with the coast of Africa. And gold was the biggest commodity that traded from Africa, that went to Europe, that went to the Arab world. Slaves were taken from Africa to the Arab world as well. So Ptolemy used that kind of information to plot a world map. So what he came up with was the whole system of geometry of drawing lines of latitude and longitudes. He is the father of meridians. You ask any geographer, who do they consider to be the father of modern geography? It is Ptolemy. 150 years after Christ. Now, if you look at the map in front of you, you can understand how he plotted the Indian Ocean to be landlocked. And at that time only, Europe had a very definite trade with India, and that was mostly land based. In the event of trade taking place by with maritimers over the across the seas, it would be Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, Indian Ocean. He who controlled the Suez Canal or the Red Sea controlled the world
Mhm.
because you would pay a tax to go through there. Now, as
Exactly.
long as the great empires of the world were European friendly, that's okay. But then we saw the emergence of the Ottoman Empire, the Arab states, which succeeded the Byzantine state. And they started with their Muslim faith to control world trade by demanding taxes and not even offering access, not even offering land based access. Now, I said this map was drawn in 150. So, by the time that the Portuguese and the Spanish emerged as the maritime powers of their day in the 1400s, this map was the known map. They knew Africa, as you can see, only up to the Sahara Desert. Nothing, nothing noted beyond. Look at the map where they draw the equator,
Hmm.
and you will see that your Ptolemy intersected the line of latitude with perpendicular meridians, lines of longitude are meridians.
Hmm.
The unknown beyond the Sahara Desert, it is Sahara, not Sahara. It's the Arab world with the soft G. You will see south of the equator that your meridians will intersect at a 90-degree angle, a perpendicular angle.
Hmm.
Okay, so he used the crossing of the lines, the meridians, and the lines of latitude to serve as coordinates to place different areas. But south of the map, you will notice he have blank blocks because this is the unknown. No one has toured here. This area remains uncharted. Now, by virtue of the fact that your Ottoman kingdom now controlled world trade, whether it be land-based or sea-based, Europe now were forced to find a different route to India. All right. So there was a lot of competition between Spain and Portugal as to who will find the alternative route to India. And this is where the church stepped in, and the Pope decided, I'm going to draw a line in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, around about where we have today the modern mid-Atlantic ridge, I would suppose. And he designated the Spanish to go west of the line, sail west to discover east. And the Portuguese had to stay east of that line, divide line in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, to find a route around Africa or wherever the continent of Africa ends to sail to India. So, with the perception that there is the unknown world, they have already heard of the mythical king of Prester John, who had this Christian empire somewhere in Africa. They have just, King Joa have just sent a land-based journey for people to go and explore with gifts, with gold, with silver, to give to Prester John. If they could not succeed, he actually nominated Bartholomew Diaz to explore via the oceans a route to India. And that followed soon after the journey by land by the explorers to Prester John. So too Bartholomew Diaz, his ship was loaded with gold and silver, so that in the end that they met up with the king, they would be able to to negotiate and peaceful negotiations. By that time, they have taken six. Bartholomew Diaz took six black Africans with him on his cruise, on his voyage. And wherever they docked or moored in Africa on the coast, they left one behind with gold and with silver to give to the kings. And they had to look after the little smaller ships with the fresh produce. So when the ship returns, they will be in position. But by the time Bartholomew Diaz crossed the equator, he was now heading into uncharted water. He used the astrolabe. When you go to the end point of Herengraaf, you see the statue of Bartholomew Diaz there standing with this instrument in his hand, which is an astrolabe. And the
Okay.
biggest lodestar of that time was the Southern Cross, and that was their guide. So when he reached the latitudes of about 20 degrees south of the equator, they know at that latitudes there is a southeaster blowing. We call today that southeaster the Cape Doctor.
Absolutely.
And you will see all along the edge of that map, they show the the blowing, and the winds were well charted. So according to the astrolabe where they've been, remember he left in the month of August 1487. January 88, he set sail to now go in a more southeasterly direction, as guided by the Cape Doctor, as guided by the wind, the southeaster. And then landfall happened. They didn't know where they are. They just know that they have made a coordinate change, which was more northerly than southerly. So they were now heading northwards. And when they felt the water warmer. This is Indian Ocean water. This is not Atlantic water. So the big myth of 1,500 years have ultimately now been dispelled, that the two oceans do meet.
Ah,
That
good.
map of the Ptolemy became obsolete. They went on land and called this place Sobra. Today we call it Mossel Bay. Now they've met Africa, but they haven't met the Khoisan of Africa. So inquisitive as the people were, they came to touch and see what kind of funny clothes these people are wearing. But then it became a bit of a stone throwing exchange and things. And either Bartholomew or one of his crew, with his bow and arrow, has shot and, yes, fatally wounded of the Khoi, the first conflict in southern Africa. So upon his return, he noted that there is a very stormy point, and to them, this must now be the meeting point of the Indian and the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
So now it became the Cape of Storms. And that is why, even though he didn't have modern geographical or mapping techniques, he designated the Cape of Good Hope to be that meeting between the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. Upon his return, he obviously stopped over in the places where he moored in Africa, and we're very sad that 5 of the 6 guides, black guides, were murdered. All right, only one returned back to King Jawa. King Jawa, in return, was very disappointed because the sailors declared mutiny. They didn't want to sail to India. They were running out of food supplies.
Was
But
that the
he was, yeah,
what?
they didn't have enough food, but they
I
had
thought
enough food.
I always thought
So
that they
what?
were scared that they were going to sail off the edge of the earth. Is that not true?
Well, they've already made a turn north into the Indian Ocean. So
Okay. So,
that fear have fallen away, but they did not have enough food to know where to take them to the journey further. So it was not going to be Bartholomew Diaz that was going to be commissioned to follow the same route. So ultimately, King Joa they dominated Vasco da Gama, and they were now desperate to sail around where the oceans meet, where they didn't meet before, according to this map in first. Now to sail to India. Already Columbus now between Diaz and da Gama have sailed to America. They sailed west to meet up with it because Ptolemy's map says that there is a rounded earth. We're not talking about the flat earth anymore. Now to the church, that was heresy. I remember Galileo was stoned to death for saying that the earth is round and not flat. But Galileo based his argument on this map of Ptolemy. But now the church was encouraging them to circumnavigate. So the church have now come to accept, yes, the earth is not flat, the earth is round. That is why we could send Columbus sailing west to reach east, and the Portuguese had to do the same. So the landfall of Columbus, and he said, yes, it wasn't Indians. We talk about Native Americans as being Indians, but that in itself was a new discovery, unexpected. But it was then left with the two oceans now for to sail around the Cape of Storms, Cape of Good Hope, and then continue his journey and to become the first one to reach here. At least now the church was happy that they could now block the advance of the Islamic faith in Europe by not being dominated by routes, but they have now discovered their own routes. A new era of maritime history and sailing. Bigger ships had to be built, longer distances. New map to come away. King Joa immediately ordered that the old map, 1,500 years old, never been questioned, needs to be replaced with modern ones. So the modern map, which unfortunately I didn't send to you, but we all know it, was then the start of drawing the map and showing that there's a point called the Cape of Good Hope, where these two oceans meet. Now, I know the debate with regard to Agulhas, and that geographically it is the southernmost point. However, in the time of Bartholomew Diaz, that is of academic interest. It is an absolute new world that started with the discovery of Bartholomew Diaz and later with Vasco da Gama. Immediately we saw after that the change in history, the death of the Ottoman Empire, because they didn't have the economic control anymore. We saw the emergence of the great empires of the Spanish, of the Portuguese. Later on, we saw the emergence of the Dutch Empire. Then after that, we saw the Germans and whoever. It was time of modern Europe to emerge. Modern Europe emerged post Vasco da Gama, Bartholomew Diaz, discovery and sailing around the Cape of Good Hope.
Wow.
It is so significant, so important, the discovery of a route of two oceans that they thought never met, but now they know it meets.
Wow.
The Cape Agulhas cannot compare historically to the significance of the Cape of Good Hope. It was a mistake, yes. Cape of Good Hope is a mistake. Cape Agulhas is correct, but the history behind it, there's nothing to compare with and when people come, they want to see what is this Cape of Storms, what is this Cape Good Hope that changed the world. And we've got it.
Yeah. So that was why it was called Cape of Good Hope, because there was a complete new hope, not only for
a new hope.
Yeah.
But also a maritime term, because if you survive the Cape of Storms, you have a good hope of reaching India. Now, you could encourage the mariners to sail to India if you talk about the Cape of Storms, because potentially they could drown or their ships could wreck. So the King Joa was the one that said, no, let's not call it the Cape of Storms. Let's have a more positive rep and call this the Cape of Good Hope.
Great. Let's hang on a little bit about these legends about these ships that actually didn't make it. There was always the Flying Dutchman.
Oh my word,
Which,
yes, that's the big one.
but he's apparently still sailing, isn't she?
I wish, I wish I had the privilege and the opportunity and the honor to see it. I would always reflect on that in my narrative when I approach the Cape of Good Hope above this mythical ship that sailed the oceans, and whenever it's misty, it sort of makes a little appearance as such. The Vliegende Hollander, which is also one of the themes of a show in Holland. It is certainly the rest of the world, this point, with the Vliegende Hollander, with the story of Diaz, with the story of Vasco da Gama, they certainly have highlighted the Cape of Good Hope more than what we have. And we don't even
Exactly.
refer to this point as the Cape of Good Hope. We talk about the Cape Point because of the
Exactly.
promenade, the the thick piece of land that juts out into the ocean.
Well, is it
Uh,
a promontory? Is it a peninsula? Is it a cape? What is it
it's
actually?
actually look, it's a cape. That's the end point of a peninsula. If you look at the entire Table Mountain range from Sig Hill down to the Cape of Good Hope, which is separated from the areas of Stellenbosch and Somerset West by the Cape Flats, you must realize that we had a time of elevated oceanic levels. So
Yes.
the ocean extended across, and that is why so that peninsula or that island stuck out. It in the past it was an island on its own, Table Mountain. All right, but as the ice caps grew and the water levels receded, this is a piece of land that was laid bare, and we call it the Cape Flats.
And that
I
still
grew up.
has, yeah, it still has proof of oceanic sand, isn't it?
I grew up in Pearls River. We had white sand dunes, and I could never understand why we have old seashells in the sand, an abundance of it. And it's not something you can preserve because they were so agile. You put your two fingers on it and they just crumble. So you to realize that this is a very ancient sea, okay?
Mhm.
But obviously, this was an area of deposition, and that is why the white sand is there. That white sand goes with, to a large extent, what we call oscillation waves. That is up and down movement. When it moves further towards the mainland, which used to be Stellenbosch, I believe, that is when your oscillation wave becomes a translation wave moving forward. And therefore, just at the foot of our mountain ranges, from Durbanville right down to Somerset West, we've got this range of hills, Durbanville Hills, Botla Hills. It is where the turbulence of the water set down more fertile soil, more loamy soil, instead of the Cape Flat sandy soil before it crashed onto the mountains of that side. I'm sure that even in I went to Botla yesterday, and I thought to myself, there must be some maritime evidence of old sea fossils that must be there. I don't know how they've ever discovered it, but I know from my upbringing in Kuilsriver that in the where the R300 runs today, that used to be sand dunes. I played there and I picked up all these fossilized shells, marine fossilized shells there.
Sure. This is very, very interesting. I want to, before we completely step off this, I just quickly want to go back to the legends. The Adamastor was also one of the legends, apparently, that is connected to Cape of Good Hope. Apart from the fact that Wagner wrote an opera on the Flying Dutchman, but there's
Mhm.
also Adamastor. And that was mentioned in Luís de Camões, how do I pronounce that? Luís de Camões, the Portuguese poet. He wrote about Adamastor, and it is so significant, this picture that we see now. that it was actually this Adamastor that grabbed the ships at the Cape of Storms, which was not supposed to be named the Cape of Storms. But we still tell these stories to visitors.
Well, what is interesting is when you do the interpretive walk of the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens, there is a little display near to the upper gate on Adamastor where they talk about the wind coming across the False Bay, and then also the myths of the Adamastor coming and emerging out of the water, causing a lot of the ships to go to ground. It was underscoring a significant point that there's a lot of rock outcrops on our coast, and if people did not know it well, they could crash. But that was said to be, the mythical story around that. But everything that we have, whether it be the Fliffenoor or the Adamastor, it is about the stormy waters around the Cape. And the stormy waters also led to the belief that this is where the two oceans collide and creates this kind of stormy conditions. Fascinating. A lot of unscientific conclusions were reached in the past. Today, we celebrate those unscientific conclusions as being the legends of the area. We've got more defined ways of explaining upwelling from the deep, of movements. Remember, there's the migratory current, the Agulhas current. Once the Mozambique current moves further down, I don't exactly know at which latitude the Mozambique current becomes the Agulhas current, but I would expect it to be about Durban. It moves more south because of prevailing winds and more north in another time of the year. So we tend to have a false bay that's warmer in the summer compared to the winter because of this migration of the warm waters of the Agulhas. But the actual, if Cape Point is not the true meeting point of the two oceans, about 200 kilometers north into the Atlantic Ocean, it is the meeting point of the ocean currents,
Yes.
because the satellite images have showed the different coloration of the water according to temperature. But remember, our continent is surrounded by a very strong continental shelf, which extends out to about 200 kilometers. And that will certainly impact on the flow of your ocean currents. So I can understand that about at the edge of the Agulhas Bank, the continental shelf, that is where the two strong oceans actually collide.
The currents.
The, they're not the oceans, the currents, yes.
Mervin, just a very different question. Does the weather have a lot of influence not only on our geography but also on our history?
Well, there are three main circulatory patterns that impact on the climate of South Africa. Now, these three circulatory patterns position themselves around 30 to 40 degrees south of the equator. They are anticyclonic in circulation. The one that will have the most significant impact on the weather of the Cape and the way we evolved at the Cape is the South Atlantic high pressure system. It's an anticyclonic circulation. So out of that anticyclonic circulation, the southeaster, which for 28 days of summer, it blows. Any 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 city or any settlement at 34 degrees south of the equator like we are and do not have a wind will have an average temperature of 35 to 36 degrees Celsius every day.
Mhm.
So you can understand with the prevalence of the Cape Doctor, and it's called the Cape Doctor because it collects all cool temperatures from the Atlantic Ocean, brings it across and cools us off to a cool 25 to 26 degrees Celsius. Now, Cape Town people moan when it's hot and the wind isn't blowing. We moan. So when the wind is blowing not so hot, we moan. This is a moaning city. But it shows it shows how significant the dominance of wind is. The same wind blows in Perth, Australia. It's called the Fremantle, with the same anticyclonic situation emanating. In the case of Peru, no wind, and we've got on the coast of Peru the Atacama Desert. In the case north of the influence of the Cape Doctor, we go into the Namaqualand and then into the Namib Desert. North of the Fremantle in Perth, you go into the Great Australian Desert. So these winds, yes, cool off, but immediately if you move out of their influence, their sphere of influence, it gets hot.
Wow.
So we should be thankful. We should be thankful for the Cape Doctor. This city have a built-in air conditioner, only on
Exactly.
days when it's windy.
You're so right. And that obviously then has an influence on human life. The sort of desert type in area, or then like you were describing now, it has an influence on the inhabitants.
Absolutely. Remember, our runways of the airport are determined by the prevailing winds. In the winter, it's the northwesterly, so that the runway will be dominant. In the summer, it's the southeaster. So the two prevailing winds determine the direction of your runways of the airport.
Like it also
Our
that it also determined our harbour, which was moved from Cape Bay to Simon's Bay.
Well, Simonstown was considered to be a more sheltered one because it
Mm.
was sheltered against the onslaught of the Cape Doctor. Cape Harbour was considered to be more vulnerable as such. So yes, it influenced the way we developed. It influenced the way we plant our vines in the wine regions because we are pest free to a large extent because of the prevalence of the wind. Because these pests or these lice that form on your vines are not so prevalent in the Cape as you in other areas. So certainly, life in general were influenced by the prevalence of this wind. The growth of the fynbos became shrubbery because of the prevalence. You can't have high growing trees. They adapted to the dominance of the wind out here. So
And
everything
mhm.
dominated by the wind.
Mervyn, you touched on fynbos, and we don't have that much time left, but I would like
Mhm.
you just to give us a little bit about fynbos, which is about 20% or nearly 20% of the whole continent's vegetation. And it is also the World Heritage Site, the whole Cape Floristic Kingdom. What is fynbos?
Look, let me start once more from my strength, and that is geography.
Okay.
This area was under the influence of lowered temperatures and the ice age and ice caps going over it. So there was a tremendous drop in temperatures. There was a tremendous increase in wind speeds, and somehow the vegetation of the area managed to adapt to the ice age. The fynbos is a survivor of flora from earlier ice age. So they would then show up the seeds, and only if there's a fire, um, flame, or 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 with the wind blowing, the spread of the fire they will open up because it is heat induced. Short to avoid the strong winds during the ice age. They had very few nutrients in the ground. They adapted to it. So once the ice age ended, we believe that this was still in the old area of the Gondwana land because we have remnants of the fynbos in Australia that was linked to us. We have evidence of that in South America, who was also linked to us, and somehow their fynbos have genetically adapted to their areas. Yes, it's fynbos, but not exactly as ours. But we've retained our unique identity with fynbos that is Cape Floral Kingdom.
Well, there you go. And fynbos does consist of four kinds of species: the proteas, the ericas, the restios, and the geophytes. So we are unique in that way that we actually do have those four species in a specific area, geographical area. So hence it can be called fynbos. Mervin, I've learned so much in this short time. I wish that I had sat at your feet more often, but maybe we can do that in times come to come. Thank you very, very much that you actually told us. Did you know how important the Cape of Good Hope is? Thank you so much.
It is a great pleasure. Much appreciated. And thank you.